Well, welcome to this lecture on the people of the kingdom as we continue our journey through the New Testament. We've seen that the gospel has arrived on the scene, that we can interact with the power of salvation in our lives, and that then that salvation allows us to bear witness as we go out into the world through the power of the Spirit to have a life that testifies to the worth and effect of following Jesus. But we're not meant to do that alone. We're meant to do that with other people who have made the same kind of yes in following Jesus as well. And this is where things get a little bit complicated and a little bit confusing for the people of the New Testament, because up until that time, the people of God had always been defined by their ancestry or their lineage. It was the Jewish people who were the chosen people. And one of the great questions of the New Testament that we begin to see in the ministry of Paul in the book of Acts and then throughout the Pauline letters is that this movement is now going to move. And that's confusing because the Jewish people had been told in no uncertain terms for so many generations to not associate or not mingle or not mix with the Gentiles. They were to stay set apart as their own priesthood of people different from the other communities in this world. But early on in the book of Acts, when Peter stands up, now being filled with the Spirit at Pentecost, he quotes a prophecy from the book of Joel in which it says that the Spirit now is going to descend on all people, and even sons and daughters both will prophesy. And that the Spirit was going to be available to anyone who said yes to following Jesus. And we see that then play itself out in the book of Acts as the message goes to the Gentile world. They often find themselves, after being baptized, speaking in tongues as the Spirit descended on them in that form to show that they really were part of the community as well. And as this was happening, Paul, who was formerly Saul, was a religious leader among the Jewish people who was trying to stamp out the Christian movement by killing these early Christians. He, on the way to Damascus, meets the risen Lord in a vision and gets knocked off his horse. And Jesus says to him, "Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And Saul says, "Who are you? What is happening?" And he says, "Well, I am Jesus, and I am now going to send you into the Gentile world to bear witness, not just in the Jewish world of Jerusalem, but out into the unknown world, to the Jews anyway, of the Gentile world in places like Corinth or Thessalonica or the region of Galatia, the city of Ephesus." A whole realm of people that worshiped a lot of different kinds of gods, had a lot of different kinds of values, really sort of a Pirates of the Caribbean kind of situation that they're going to have to head into in this Gentile world. And not only that, these Gentiles were going to be part of the community of the kingdom. And that's going to create a lot of havoc in some of the thinking of these early disciples. But if they had taken a bit of care early on, they could see that even in the ministry of Jesus, that he was indicating or foreshadowing this very event. And so in the very famous parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus talks about the idea of who is our brother or who is the person with whom we have fellowship. And he references the Samaritan at the end of the story after two religious leaders fail to help this man at the side of the road that desperately needed help. It was the Samaritan who offered help. And Jewish people would have been scandalized by that notion because they never even wanted to set foot in the region of Samaria. Samaria to them was seen as half Jewish people. They were akin to even dogs, they would have referred them to at that time. And if they had to travel somewhere around Israel, they would have traveled specifically around Samaria in order to get to their place because they didn't even want to sully their foot in that land. And now Jesus is foreshadowing, saying, hang on a minute, even the Samaritan is our brother. Or women were treated so terribly in that culture as property. They were seen as as people who are not able to even testify in a court of law because all of what they said was deceitful and could not be trusted. And yet who is at the tomb and who is the first disciple or the first apostle to the apostles? It's the women at the tomb who Jesus says, now go tell my disciples the good news that I've been risen. Entrusting the women who were seen as untrustworthy, he entrusted the women with some of the best news in the history of this world to tell other people. So you see Jesus already beginning to upend this more contained community of Jewish people, and that the gospel is going to go outward. And that led then to Paul's missionary journeys, about which we read in the book of Acts, where he goes to places like Corinth and Thessalonica in the region of Galatia and Ephesus. And when he goes to these communities, he simply leans into the Spirit to call out the people who are to be part of this new community of faith. And if we had been back alive at that time, I think we would have been surprised by how much of rabble it would have felt to be in this community. It certainly was not the best and the brightest that were part of it. It was certainly not the people that we would think would be a part of it, but everybody who wanted to be part of it was in. It was no longer about pedigree. It was no longer about ancestry. You didn't have to have even a single bit of Torah knowledge. You didn't have to be circumcised. You simply just needed to say yes to following Jesus. And in all of that, we see this great mystery of God's redemptive plan moving out always into the world to unfold more and more and more people. And they have this beautiful passage that Peter writes in one of his letters where he was initially resistant to all of this. But as he writes his letter, he says, "But now you are a royal priesthood. You are a chosen people. You have been called to declare the praises of him who has brought you out of darkness and into his marvelous light." And in that, we see this new community. And as the church is not meant to be an institution that has a steeple and a sign and a website and a fancy saying and draws all sorts of people, or a business or anything like that. The church is simply the gathering of people from any walk of life, race, ethnicity, gender. Anyone who wants to say yes to following Jesus is in, and they form a new people in whom the Spirit dwells together. And their relationship is governed by the love for one another, so much so that we are called a temple in which the Spirit of God dwells together. And so it's us together meant to shine the light of God's beautiful kingdom in the world around us in the way we treat one another despite our differences.